Welcome back to the Play by Play Podcast YouTube channel, where today we are going to be doing a full reaction to UFC 320 and mainly Alex Pereira knocking out Magomed Ankalaev to become the two-time, the new undisputed UFC light heavyweight championship of the world. And on top of that, we are going to see for what is in the future for Alex Pereira in terms of him wanting to move up to heavyweight, the potential matchups that are up there, him wanting to fight at the White House card. And speaking of the White House card, we will also be looking at Conor McGregor and his recent announcements concerning his return, which is supposed to happen at this point at the White House card. But first, really quick, before we get started with the video, I want to encourage you guys to go down below, leave a like, subscribe, comment on the video, make sure to share it with your friends. And if you haven't already, go ahead and follow us on all social medias, that being TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those ads are going to be down below. We're on all those social medias. You'll get to see my latest reaction to breaking news from the NBA, the NFL, and combat sports. And you will never miss for whenever the podcast decides to upload an episode. And without further ado, guys, let's not waste any more time. Let's go ahead and hop into this and see what happened at UFC 320. So UFC 320, what a event. What a card, really. And it was one of the more stacked UFC cards that I feel like we've had in a while. You know, two pretty solid championship fights with some interesting matchups attached to them. You had, obviously, the highlight was Ankalaev versus Pereira, which was kind of your classic, rematch between a former champion and the new champion who just defeated him, but also an attack of style between a Dagestani-type wrestler and a Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy who is also a big-time striking specialist. Then the co-main, you had Merab Dvalishvili going up against Corey Sandhagen. That also kind of, classic matchup of wrestling against striking. You then had Yuri Prochazka going up against Khalil Roundtree to crown potentially the number one contender for who ended up winning in the main event. And all throughout that, it was just a really fun card. Starting off with Yuri Prochazka, he looked really impressive. And he really, a majority of these fights that he's not going up against, the top tier of the light heavyweight division, right? When he's not going up against Alex Pereira, in reality, he really does just separate himself from the rest of the crop. I mean, he has showed himself to be a true contender and a guy that is going to stay a contender for years and years to come within this division. And if, something like a Pereira move up to heavyweight ends up happening, it could definitely be in the cards for him to go up and potentially become a two-time undisputed light heavyweight champion. Then you have Merab Dvalishvili going up against Corey Sandhagen. Obviously, not a lot to talk about here. Merab absolutely dominated once again. He ended up setting the record for 20 total takedowns in one fight. Corey did a little bit of a solid job, similar to what Sean O'Malley did in the Merab fight, which was he came on late. Those fourth and fifth rounds, he looked solid. He had a lot of really good spinning back kicks to kick Merab back into the fence. But overall, it was just too little too late, and Merab ended up draining him. And he is, in my opinion, the most dominant champion within the UFC right now. I know that Islam has had a really long run, and now he's moving up to welterweight. I know that Volk, even though he lost to Ilia Topuria, had a long reign prior to that and even challenged for the lightweight belt. I know that Ilia Topuria has been knocking people out left, right, and center. But to me, Merab is just unstoppable. And I don't really know at this moment who in that bantamweight division could realistically beat him. And I'm wondering if there's a potential for him to go up to featherweight as well. I know that he is a little bit of a smaller guy, but could you imagine a Merab Dvalishvili versus Alexander Volkanovski unification fight there? That would be absolutely incredible. But he moves on. He did ended up calling out Piotr Jan in his post-fight press conference, which, is an interesting rematch to come back, and is definitely, at the moment, Jan is definitely the only deserving guy within that division. Obviously, you can't do Sandhagen, can't do Jan. I think Umar is one more win away from facing Merab again, and even so, I think Merab, at the point that he's at right now, ends up wiping the floor for him. So it'd be nice, get that Piotr Jan rematch, and then potentially running back with Umar following that. But then we get to the main event, like we had been mentioning, Magomed Ankalaev, Alex Pereira. Pereira ends up knocking him out a minute and 20 seconds into the first round. And I have to applaud Alex Pereira because I think that he really showed that he can go out and adjust from previous fights, that he can, fight by fight, really improve, because he had a brilliant strategy going into this fight. And that was simply fight on the front foot, put pressure on Ankalaev, put him on the back foot and have him stepping back, which was a brilliant game plan, not only because, number one, when Ankalaev is going forward, he could use his size to really bully Pereira and back him up against the fence, use him into put him into clinching situations potentially, which could get a little bit messy. And Pereira does have a difficult time on the back foot being able to plant his feet and fire off big shots. So not only did it help his boxing ability and his power, but it also kept Ankalaev from being able to reach for takedowns. And because Pereira was in constant pressure and was holding that right hand back ready to fire, it kept Ankalaev from really throwing any punches whatsoever. I mean, he was really trying to defend and having to reflex off of what Pereira threw so that he didn't get caught with the right hand. And even so, even with him doing that, he still ended up getting caught with a big-time right hand. Gets caught with a big-time right hand, then ends up shooting for a takedown. It was the wrong move. Pereira was all over him. Ankalaev was hurt. He was a little bit disoriented. Pereira ends up putting him on his back and just starts going to work, hammer fisting, a couple of elbows in there, some straight rights, and Ankalaev couldn't fire back. He couldn't defend himself, and it was easy pickings for Alex Pereira to get back his title, which I'm definitely glad to see just from a fan standpoint, because he is definitely the most entertaining light heavyweight fighter on the planet. The dude is just a human highlight reel. I mean, he has an amazing body of work for such little time that he has been within the UFC, and he has pretty much hurt or knocked out every single person that he has been in the octagon with, which brings us, to the interesting question, which is what is next for him? Because at this point, the UFC light heavyweight division has definitely been one of, if not the weakest division in the UFC for some time now. Ever since John Jones left to move up to heavyweight, that division has kind of been a barren wasteland. And that's important because Pereira has notified Dana White and has been asking Dana White to move him up to the heavyweight division, to go up and put him in a potential heavyweight title fight, and has even asked for John Jones at the UFC White House Card next year in July, which is a huge fight, and one that now both Pereira and Jones have asked for. John Jones obviously asked for it during the lead up to the Stipe fight, said that was a much bigger fight than having to fight Tom Aspinall for the undisputed heavyweight title. Pereira wants John Jones, and that is a big time fight against two of the biggest names in the UFC's history, if we're being completely honest. If we're being honest, not really a big time compelling matchup when it comes to the styles. Yes, Pereira does have a fighting chance. He does have a puncher's chance within that fight, but I do think that John is just too skillful on the ground. If he were able to get Pereira on his back and just be able to rain down on him with a nasty ground and pound with big time elbows and stuff like we saw in that first round against Stipe, I think that would be easily over. And I think that John, with just his size that he has right now at heavyweight, will be able to throw Pereira around and really have his way with him. But it would still be a really compelling matchup, and it would be a big time fight between two big names. And that's important right now because, like I said, when you look at the state of the light heavyweight division, there's not really anybody right now that Pereira can realistically fight as of right now. I mean, I don't think that there's really a compelling argument for a trilogy with Ankalaev, seeing as how this fight has gone with him knocking it out. I think that it's kind of took all the air out of the tank for a potential trilogy. I mean, had the fight been a little bit more competitive, then maybe you could make an argument for that. But because he just wasted him, I don't see the reason for really going through with that. Khalil Roundtree, he just got not stopped by Yuri Prohaska. Yuri, I mean, Alex won and dominated the two fights that they had. I don't really see him potentially getting a trilogy unless he has, one or two big time knockouts against two other big time contenders like a Magomed Ankalaev. Jan Blachowicz, don't even start me about that. Jamal Hill is entertaining, but Alex knocked him out. Carlos Ulberg is kind of really the only big time matchup for Pereira right now. And even then, I think that he wastes him. But him being able to get a big time win over Dominic Reyes definitely pushed his stock. But after that, man, there is really nowhere else for Alex Pereira to really go. And I think that is why, not only him, but UFC fans really want to see him move up to heavyweight because, think about this for a second. There could be a lot of big-time enticing matches for Pereira, even outside of, a championship fight with a John Jones or even potentially a Tom Aspinall. I mean, could you think of a matchup like Alex Pereira versus Curtis Blades, Alex Pereira versus Sergey Pavlovich versus Alexander Volkov? Could you imagine if we have pretty much a stand-up boxing fight inside of the octagon between Alex Pereira and Cyril Gane? Pereira with the big time power and gone with his technicality, with his ability as a kickboxer on the feet. What an entertaining striking matchup that could be. So I think that there is just a lot more excitement within that heavyweight division. Now, how well does he do there? I'm not too sure. I do think that there are a lot more well-rounded fighters at that heavyweight spot. Pereira, as we know, obviously can make that weight that is even closer to what his natural weight is. And he is probably the one guy that I could see becoming a 3-division champion because of what he's done at middleweight and light heavyweight. But it'd be a hard path to go through 100%. But the good thing is he wouldn't be drained whatsoever. But again, he would really have to upgrade his ability to be on the ground, his ability to bring offense to his ground game, not just defending. And then he would obviously have to be able to have some big time outstriking for those guys. But it brings up a lot of cool and fun time matchups. And Alex Pereira versus John Jones, especially with Dana White needing more American fighters on a White House card, that could be a main eventer. Alex Pereira versus Tom Aspinall could be a big time main eventer for the White House card. And that fight actually, if Tom Aspinall is able to win that fight against Alex Pereira, that would actually be big time for Tom Aspinall's star and be able to push him forward and continue to build his resume as a compelling champion, especially because he wasn't able to get the John Jones unification. That could be a big time win for Tom Aspinall as well. So I know why Dana is kind of skeptical about it and wants to hold off. I understand that he doesn't want to lose his biggest star and probably his weakest division because, after that, it's going to be all of Alex Pereira's defeated opponents kind of fighting each other for the belt, and I don't think that anybody's realistically going to see them as the real champion because none of them beat Pereira. So I understand why Dana's a little bit skeptical and a little bit slow to potentially make that happen. But if he does, he could cash in on a lot of big-time money fights, especially with how active Pereira loves to be, and especially with the fact that we can't lie that while it has been a short window for Pereira, he is on the older side. He's in his late 30s, so you need to get the ball rolling on him quick. I understand that he is a warrior. He loves to fight. He's probably going to be in this game for quite a while, for a couple more years within this, but he is on the older side, and it only takes a couple of wrong fights for him to start really going downhill. So I think if Dana wants to do it, he needs to capitalize on it now. But speaking about that White House card, we continue to get more and more news on potential matchups that we're looking at for that fight. And of course, the big one outside of a potential return of John Jones is the return of the notorious Conor McGregor, who did an absolutely amazing job this weekend promoting his BKFC event. I didn't personally watch it, but I saw so many clips of him promoting at the press conferences, him wanting to go out and fight both Mike Perry and Jeremy Stephens, him talking trash to both of them within the face-off and shoulder bumping him. It was just it was funny stuff to see, man. It was comedy gold, and I like to see, just on a personal level, I do like to see the fact that McGregor, he seems a little bit more clear-headed. His speech is a lot better than it has been over the past 5 years since we've seen him stop fighting. It seems like he's in, obviously I don't know his personal situation, but it does seem at this moment that he's doing a little bit better personally, that he could potentially be off of maybe some of the substances that he was doing during this time of him coming back from injury, that he could be potentially, stopping the partying maybe a little bit. And he's starting to get into a little bit of a better headspace and potentially even bringing some consistency with his training, which is nice to see, which is what he is definitely going to need to get back on track to make his return after, 4 or 5 years outside of the octagon. But he has confirmed, as we're talking with, Fox News and sort, that he has already signed the official contract to go ahead and fight on the UFC White House card. Now, I'm not sure if the UFC has officially confirmed that. I don't know if I heard anything from Dana this weekend officially confirming that. But McGregor is saying that, and it seems to be the big push from Dana to go ahead and make that happen. So I think it is all about confirmed as of right now. Now, we don't have any word on an opponent. Now, McGregor has been calling for Michael Chandler to be his opponent. Obviously, that was a guy that he was originally supposed to come back to fight last year before he had a toe injury that had him ending up pulling out of the fight. And that would be a fun matchup. And once again, it would allow you to have another American on a UFC White House card, which is really what the UFC is lacking right now, with no American champions outside of Kayla Harrison at that UFC women's bantamweight division. So that would be nice to potentially have Michael Chandler on there. And I think that is, a good matchup, for McGregor. Although not a 100% easy matchup, seeing as how once again, McGregor hasn't fought in 4 years. He's had substance abuse issues. He hasn't been training consistently. He's coming off of a gnarly leg break and whatnot. He's coming off of a toe injury that he got a year ago, which was so bad that he ended up having to pull out. It is clear that his body is beginning to break down. He is on, the downside of his career. He is a lot older. And you're looking at a guy in Michael Chandler, who, yes, hasn't won majority of his fights within the UFC, but always comes ready to fight, is always consistently training, is always consistently within the best shape of his life, and is going to come prepared, and always 100% tries his best to push through any little bit of adversity that he faces to go out and win any kind of fight. We saw it in the Dustin Poirier fight. We saw him in the fight against Justin Gaethje, even against Charles Oliveira. When he's badly hurt and he's bruised and he's battered and he's bleeding like a water faucet out of his nose, he still tries his best to go out and win. Whereas with Conor McGregor, we haven't really seen that with him throughout his entire career. I mean, when was the last time that we legitimately saw Conor fight back from real adversity? Like truly, both of the Poirier fights, he crumbled right away. Khabib, he really just took his ass beaten right from the beginning of the fight. Cerrone was an easy matchup for him. Before that, Nate Diaz 2? The rematch with Nate Diaz potentially? Before that, you probably have to go all the way back to the Chad Mendes fight, where we truly saw him be able to push through adversity, where he was bleeding from his forehead and got out of, being through majority of that second round, being controlled on the ground from Chad Mendes and being able to get up and knock him out. That was really the last time, and that was a decade ago, by the way, that Chad Mendes fight was. So it's been a very, very long time since we've seen Conor actually be able to push through adversity in a fight and be able to come out on the better end and win it. Now, if it's not Michael Chandler, which who knows where we can go with this thing, because again, it's October, guys. We still have 8 or 9 months until that card ends up actually happening. There's so much that could end up changing, that and this card could be completely different than what we're talking about now. But if it's not Michael Chandler for Conor McGregor, if Conor McGregor ends up coming back, who else could it be? And I've seen a lot of different suggestions. I've seen people suggest Max Holloway with the BMF belt. I think that would be really interesting. How enticed would Conor be to win the BMF belt? I'm not 100% sure, but with the energy and enthusiasm that he is showing at just coming back, I think that definitely could be, and especially with him having a win over Max and them being able to push that storyline of, I believe, was that Max's UFC debut? I think it was Max's UFC debut and him stepping in on short notice. That could be an interesting storyline to play. There also has been talk about, and this is a long shot, I understand, but again, we still have 9 months for all of this to come to fruition. There has been talk about people wanting Dana White to start a 165-pound division, a division for people who maybe at 170 pounds is a little bit too big for them, but it's very, very difficult to reach down all the way to 155. A little bit of a middle ground division at 165 pounds. Could that be, if Dana does end up starting that, which is very, very unlikely. I want to make that very clear. But if that does start to happen, I've heard names swirling around like Colby Covington and Charles Oliveira within that division. Could that potentially be something that Conor could come back to? Absolutely. I think a lot of people would absolutely entertain a Conor McGregor versus Colby Covington fight for the inaugural 165-pound belt holder. I mean, could you imagine the press conferences between Conor McGregor and Colby Covington, especially Colby Covington being a big-time Trump supporter and him being at the White House card, how much President Trump would love that, knowing President Trump and who he is and his ego and whatnot, how much he would enjoy that. Could you imagine the stand-up fight that both of those guys could give us on the feet? Sure, there would be a little bit of trouble for Conor in the wrestling game, but that's almost every single opponent that he's going to face. And actually, if you really think about it, if Dana is able to start off that division and if Conor is able to come off with a win and become the inaugural champion, that could be the fight that ends up pushing kind of a second stint for Conor McGregor's career. I mean, if you really think about this, if he is able to go ahead and fight Colby Covington and able to beat him and becomes the inaugural 165-pound champion, then after that, there's a lot of very interesting matchups that he can go out and rebuild his resume with. Conor versus Charles Oliveira after that, like we just mentioned. Obviously, again, that's very, very difficult for Conor, but if we could think about maybe a prime Conor with his more mixed martial arts type of stand-up style, being more light on his feet against Charles Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with the speed that Conor is able to produce, maybe that could be a solid matchup for him. And then after Charles, if he is able to beat Charles after that, could Islam Makhachev come down to 165 pounds and we have a Dagestani versus Ireland rematch that we never got to get because Khabib ended up retiring? Could somebody like a Paddy Pimblett, which could be another big-time pay-per-view starter, especially next to McGregor with those big-time press conferences? Could Ilia Topuria coming up to 165 pounds? Max Holloway, who we talked about? So while it is unlikely that a 165-pound division could actually happen, I actually think that if the chips end up falling right for Dana and for Conor, and Conor's able to go out and begin to win some of those matchups and become the inaugural champion, I actually think that that is something that could motivate him enough to actually start a second chapter to his career and bring back a little bit of that fire that he lost. And by the way, speaking on that, I am, pleasantly surprised and really, really happy to hear him be honest and humble during, the BKFC post-fight press conferences and talk about how Stardom, personally broke him at sometimes and took away a lot of his ability to be humble and whatnot, and show empathy to other people and to show that his mind was still grounded. So I appreciate that he's saying that, and I like to see that he is definitely in a much better mindset. I'm just hoping that he continues to train hard so that he can come back and put on a big-time show at that UFC White House card. But overall, let me know what you guys think about all of that. What did you think about what I said today? What do you think is the best move for Dana White to do with Alex Pereira? Is it moving him up to heavyweight? Is it keeping him at light heavyweight, and have him just become the big-time, continue to be the big-time star at light heavyweight? What do you think is the best opponent for Conor McGregor? Is it, Michael Chandler at 155? Or is it him going up to 170 and maybe fighting at welterweight, potentially against a trilogy against Nate Diaz? Or is it Dana coming up with a completely new division at 165 pounds and bringing all kinds of new matchups for Conor in? I think that all of those could be a really, really good enticing fights for Conor. And man, that UFC White House card just can't come any sooner. So with that, guys, I'm going to go ahead and end it off there. If you guys are watching this video on YouTube, please feel free to subscribe, leave a like down below, comment, and share with your friends. And if you haven't already, go ahead and follow us on all social medias, that being TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those ads are going to be down below, where once again, if you follow us on all those social medias, you'll not only get to see my latest reaction to breaking news from the NBA, the NFL, and combat sports, but you'll never miss whenever the podcast has to upload an episode. Without further ado, guys, that is all that I have for you guys today. I thank you guys for your support. I will see you guys on the next one. Have a great start to your week, and peace.